It's 1985, and you're standing with a crowd of people in a narrow, dusty road, awaiting to hear the sounds of a turbo-powered monster, when all of a sudden, a madman comes screaming around the bend, piloting this death wish on wheels. Your one goal is to be the last one to jump out of the way. It's a sick game you play, but the rush of adrenaline is as high octane as the driver's fuel, and while it may seem he has no regard for your life, his one goal is to listen to his co-driver direct him down a path of glory and victory. Today we can look back and wonder if we ourselves would have the guts to participate in this madness. This is the infamous Group B.
There's nothing wrong with your video device. Do not attempt to adjust the picture.
In the beginning, the world of rally was pedestrian. It was just road cars with aggressive tires, and for the most part, rallies were held by private individuals that just wanted to go fast. Drivers like Joginder Singh, most notably known as the Flying Sikh, were buying cars off the lot and racing them. This bunch had to modify and maintain the cars themselves, and manufacturers didn't really care about racing back then for production cars. Now, that all changed in the 70s. Car companies saw the brutal roads and witnessed their cars being pushed to the limits. Then, of course, they noticed an advertisement opportunity. I mean, if a car could survive a crash course through the African jungle, it could certainly survive your urban commute. And I mean, come on, who doesn't want to go off-roading and thrash around on their way to work or the way home? And that idea went into overdrive when Lancia and Audi started producing purpose-built rally cars. These weren't your dad's grocery getter with the exhaust cut off. These things barely obeyed homologation rules, and they were meant to do one thing: win where the tarmac ended. Lancia's Stratos was a beast of a sports car, with a shouting V6 and a wedge shape that was more reminiscent of a supercar rather than a rally car, made a huge impact. Audi, however, really upset the status quo. They wanted to sell all-wheel drive cars, and rally racing was the perfect place to prove the concept to the masses. So, they quietly had the rules changed in their favor. What the rule makers didn't know was that a simple change to allow any driveline would disturb the balance of power forever. To what should have been no surprise to anyone, having all-wheel drive helps a lot when the roads are made for everything you wouldn't normally drive on. The all-wheel drive Quattro's success created this feedback loop. Audi showed people their rally success to prove the concept of their all-wheel drive. People watched and became interested in the rally. They would show up just to watch Audi race. And so, Audi would have to do even better to keep them entertained. At this point, the number of spectators began to increase exponentially. Riding the wave of newfound popularity, the FIA, the guys who write the rules, saw an opportunity to really kick WRC into overdrive by making it much easier for manufacturers to build these purpose-built cars, and in turn kick the speeds up a notch in order to entertain people around the globe. So in 1982, the FIA rules were rewritten. The OG rules, Group 1 and Group 2, remained as Group N and Group A, and those had to have 4 seats and 5,000 units produced for sale, along with some very strict rules. Now, the most important part, though, was that a new group was added, Group B, and that meant you only needed 200 cars produced, and there were very few restrictions. The restrictions that did exist were all rules based on the engine's displacement. You could have less weight and better tires if you used a smaller engine. Officials thought this would keep cars in check. And if you stuck a giant 5-liter V8 in your car, well, you'd suffer with small wheels and extra weight penalties. But if you used a little 4-banger, then you could keep the car nimble. They thought forcing companies to use those small engines would keep the power down and keep the sport safe. This is where Group B proved that size doesn't matter. It's how you use it that counts. By the time Group B ended in 1986, most of the cars were pushing 500 horsepower out of relatively tiny engines. meaning that they were fast, light, and truly on the edge of human ability, or past the edge in many cases. Because as you'll see as we journey through Group B, death and destruction were major players in the saga of the most insane cars ever. Alright. Although it was a major part of the Group B saga, let's move on to something a little more positive, like the cars and the absolute psychopaths that were behind the steering wheel. The first Group B cars represented some of the biggest changes to the sport. By cutting the manufacturers free, makers like Audi, Lancia, and Opel went all in. Yet from a distance, everything still felt relatively normal. Most early Group B cars were still production cars. Opel's Ascana B400 was a fairly basic sedan with a rear-wheel drive and under 300 horsepower. Audi's Quattro A1 was largely unchanged from their race-defining offering from the years prior. The only company that really shook things up was Lancia. They stayed rear-wheel drive, but the 037, it really pushed the boundaries of what was allowed. Piloted by Walter Röhrl, the 037 was a purpose-built race car masquerading as a production car. And to hear Walter say it, the 037 was one of the best cars to ever exist, and the battle between titans began. The entire season was rife with insanity. Audi's Quattro would usually win when things got rough, but on tarmac, the Lancia and Röhrl were untouchable. To even the odds, Lancia did a lot of, we won't call it cheating, but let's just say that bribery, trickery, and a bad case of blind officials plagued the courses. Which is to say that against all odds, Lancia would win the manufacturer title in 1983. Audi, however, had proven that all-wheel drive was the future. Audi came in second overall, and the drivers of the Quattro pulled in a majority of the driver champion trophies, including the Wonder Woman of Rally, Michele Mouton, who I don't think gets talked about enough. If it wasn't for a few unfortunate troubles with her Audi Quattro, she may well have run down and turned the tides against Röhrl. For the 1984 season, Audi decided to shut everyone else out. They made a new Quattro, the Quattro Sport, which had over 400 horses powering all four wheels. They also stole Röhrl and put him behind the wheel of their new race car. And even though he complained about it, with four of the top drivers and one hell of a car, Audi was to completely dominate the entire series. The 037 was no match this time, and despite a wave of newcomers with wild entries like Nissan's 240 RS and Porsche with their 911 variant, the Audi remained untouchable. That is until late in the season, Peugeot entered the ring with the 205 Turbo T16. It was a car built for one purpose and one purpose alone: run down Audi. With 350 horsepower and a lot less weight, the 205 became the car that everyone else emulated. Audi still managed to win the season, but that would be the last time. The age of the hatchbacks had begun, and in 1985, the entire event was turned up to 11. And believe it or not, the Quattro came in with 600 horsepower, but the extra power couldn't catch the lightweight, short wheelbase Peugeot 205. Now, Toyota was the newcomer here with their Celica twin-cam turbo, along with Renault with their R5 Maxi Turbo. They would occasionally tread close to the Audi-Peugeot battle, but ultimately, there just wasn't anything that could beat the 205's winning combination of power and lightness. That is, until Lancia stepped back into the game, with arguably one of the most famous hatchbacks ever made, the Delta S4. It was a mid-engine all-wheel drive hot hatch that pushed nearly 500 horsepower out of a 1.8-liter engine. Now, they came in too late in the season to dethrone Peugeot, but the races they entered, they won. By the 1986 season, just 3 short years after the first Group B rivalries were hatched, the once dominant 037 was a fossil. The Quattro? You couldn't find one on a podium. Instead, the new breed of ultra-light hatchbacks like the S4 and the 205, along with new purpose-built Group B rally cars like the MG Metro 6R4, the legendary Ford RS200, they were all kings of the back roads and gravel trails. Lining up to start the season, there was not a single competitive car making less than 450 horsepower. Every single one was all-wheel drive, had very minimum safety, and was truly at the limit of what a car could be. Michele Mouton would call Audi's S1 the most difficult car to drive she had ever been in. Ford's RS200 had so much trouble with traction, this car would just slide off the road for seemingly no reason. Like there was a bunch of banana peels on the track or something, or maybe they got hit by a red shell, or... Alright, let's bring it back. It had bad traction. It was so bad that the officials thought that they were faking their horsepower numbers because they just couldn't keep their car on the road. Lancia's Delta S4 may have even pushed the 700 horsepower mark, since they would retune the car as soon as the tech inspection was over. Not cheating though. They weren't cheating. 1986 was poised to not only be one of the greatest car shows on Earth, but push the very limits of human ability. And the crowds were there for it. Now in the beginning, when Group B started, there were a few diehard rally fans that would come out and watch, and maybe it would get local news coverage, but by 1986, the manufacturer's arms race had created the ultimate motorsport spectacle. People poured in from all over the world to see the fire-breathing monsters duke it out, and spectators became as much part of the action as the drivers. On every corner, fans would gather in the thousands. They would pack in so tightly that they would literally be spilling into the streets. It got so bad that avoiding spectators became part of the race. Drivers found themselves avoiding gravel patches, feeling out track conditions, and driving through an obstacle course of tourists, cameras, and overturned barriers.
And people were just standing there, and then a couple of people take over the windscreen, and you feel inside that now they must be dead now.
Having to avoid these human-shaped obstacles was more than some drivers were comfortable doing. Many sought therapy, and others would look back and wonder just what the hell anyone was thinking. But you can't tell a crowd of bloodthirsty motorsports fans to tone it down, which tragically is where the fall of Group B begins. During the record-setting 1986 season, a Ford RS200, which remember was notorious for horrible traction, spun off into the crowd while trying to avoid some slower spectators who failed to remove themselves from the track. 3 people lost their lives that day, and dozens more were injured. Most teams withdrew from the remainder of that race out of respect. Now, tragedy would strike again shortly after when a Lancia S4 caught fire, killing both the driver and the co-driver. It was the second time Lancia's disregard for safety had a body count. While the 1986 rally was coming to a close, Lancia with their S4 and Peugeot with the still dominant 205 were neck and neck, with Peugeot just barely eking out the final victory. But it was a hollow victory, since it would be the last Group B race. Audi had already withdrawn, and WRC officials had announced that the rules would be completely rewritten for the next season. In just 5 short years, the cars had doubled and tripled in power. The drivers were pushed to the absolute limits, many of them needing therapy for years to come. The rally had become one of the most dangerous races on Earth. It produced some of the most insane cars ever built, and to this day is referred to as the golden age of rally. While the insanity has faded with time, the spirit lives on. The time of the Killer Bees was a giant leap forward for technology. Turbo design advanced further than anyone thought possible. Rally cars became tiny, fire-breathing hatchbacks and adopted a form factor that is still used to this day. Now, yes, they've gotten a lot safer, and teams no longer need to keep a psychiatrist on staff. Also, roll cages are inspected by more than just a casual glance. Power is restricted, and thankfully, fire suppression systems are standard. Yet, we owe so much to the mad men and women piloting the insane creations of overworked engineers. Looking back, coming out of the 70s, the automotive world was on a bad path. Fuel regulations were choking engines, and many people felt like they were seeing the end of racing. But then along came Group B, where engine size meant nothing, and small modern cars were blowing past supercars every day. Racing was not dead. Power was no forgotten concept. And to those maniacs, we owe our thanks for pushing the boundaries of what's possible and inspiring all of us to understand that we are capable of much more. Well, if you made it this far, I definitely appreciate you watching. If there was something about the video that you didn't like, let me know in the comments below. I'm always looking to improve. And let me know what you guys want to see next. You can subscribe if you want to get alerted for my next video, and I'll see you in the next one.
50, easy left. 50 grid, 100 road.
Dear God.
You have to stay on road, Sammy, otherwise car will break down.